But certainly the Canadian Prime Minister has made some serious charges recently.
Yes, the Canadian Prime Minister made some allegations, initially privately and then publicly.
Thank you so much for being here. You really do Hudson great honor. I want to say I'm especially grateful because while Hudson is a nonpartisan think tank and we work with people in both parties, many would say that Hudson has closer relations sometimes with the Republican Party. So we especially appreciate that you have reached out in a way, in a bipartisan way, toward the opposition. It reminds us that both India and the United States are democracies, do believe in pluralism, and we at Hudson appreciate this sign of India's concern, faith in that principle. This is also, by the way, I just saw yesterday that Swami Nadan had died at 98, I believe. He was an example of Indian-American cooperation, not on the governmental level, but his work with Norman Borlaug helped establish the Green Revolution, which has been transformational in the lives of literally billions of people in India and around the world. And this is, this reminds me at least of what the U.S. and India, what Americans and Indians can accomplish together. And I hope we will be seeing more of it. Minister Jaishankar, I should say first too, before I get into my questions, that he has agreed to take questions from the floor. And the way we do this at Hudson is we ask people to email questions. I know you all have cell phones here. I know you know how to text while listening. So we ask you to send questions to press, P-R-E-S-S, at hudson.org. And those questions will come up to me. I'll have an opportunity to look at them, consolidate them where we have several questions on the same topic, and perhaps also forestall the possibility, it's not unknown, that sometimes people confuse questions with speeches. So please do that, and we will conclude the meeting with your questions. At the G20 and elsewhere, we hear that India is looking for a change in international architecture or in the way world politics works and world institutions. I've also heard India described as a reformist rather than as a revisionist power. It seeks real change in the status quo, but not necessarily in the way that perhaps some of our colleagues and friends in Russia and China might do. What is it that India is looking for in change in the world situation, and how does that affect, do you think, India's vision of where we're all going?
Let me put it to you this way, that, the world as we live it today is largely a Western construct. If you looked at the world architecture, to use your words, there's been obviously enormous change in the last 80 years. If one looked at the major economies of the 1940s and 50s, they are very different from the major economies today, and nothing illustrates it more than the G20 itself. The list of the G20 will tell you is the easiest way of actually getting a sense of the changes in the world. Now, for India, when we confront a largely Western created architecture, obviously we would like to encourage and facilitate and induce and pressurize changes which are badly needed. But it is done to add a non-Western layer and a input. So I make this very important distinction where India is concerned. India is non-Western. India is not anti-Western. So when we speak about, and I give you an example which we discussed even at the G20. It's very clear today that if we are serious about climate action, if you are looking to sustain, to ensure that sustainable development goals are well resourced, then somewhere we have to find the financial muscle for that. Now, for us too, it is the international financial institutions, the bank, the World Bank and the fund, which will be at the core of that effort. So a lot of what we are seeking to do is to improve and, I would say, refresh institutions, make them more fit for purpose. And that even applies to the United Nations. We do believe today that, a United Nations where the most populous country is not in the Security Council, when the 5th largest economy is not there, when a continent of 50 plus countries is not there, that United Nations obviously lacks credibility and to a large degree effectiveness as well. So the whole, when we approach the world, it's not with a, sort of pull down the pillars kind of approach. It is very much, what can we do to make it better, fitter, efficient, purposeful. That's the kind of mindset we bring to bear.
Well, I have to say, I find myself in agreement with much of what you say, especially when I look at the United Nations, and I think that in the official UN system, India is sort of said to be equal to Luxembourg. They both have one vote in the General Assembly.
I like Luxembourg.
Well, I have nothing against. Actually, if you're ever in Luxembourg, eat the duck. It's fantastic.
Okay.
But but the idea that those two political entities should be equally weighted in the United Nations is, I think, an absurdity that future generations will not be able to understand when they look back at our times. Now, over the summer, you said that there are three big Eurasian powers, Russia, China, and India, and that the Indo-Russian relationship is not transactional, this is geopolitical. How do you see India-Russia relations, especially at a time where Russia and China appear to be working much more closely together than before?
This approach is not something new. In fact, since independence in India, this has been the basic thinking about our geopolitical predicament, which is if there are three major polities occupying the landmass, the central landmass of the world, then how do you ensure that there is a balance, and how do you ensure you are not facing an adverse balance? Now, we had a phase, I would say late 40s, which were particularly testing for us. This was when this is still Stalin's Soviet Union at that time. I think the Indian diplomacy very sensibly set to work on the basic international relations principle of your neighbor's neighbor. So your neighbor's neighbor is intrinsically well disposed towards you. Since the 50s, actually, there's been a very, systematic mutual cultivation. Now, it's not just us thinking about Soviet Union, now Russia. It's also the Russians thinking about India with the same principle and the same logic in mind. Now, that actually is such a powerful logic, at least in our part of the world, that if you consider international relations over the last 70 years, the US-Russian relations, the China-Russia relations, the US-China relations, Europe, pretty much every big relationship in the last 70 years has seen a great deal of volatility. You had sharp ups and downs. The India-Russia is very exceptional. It's been very steady. It may not be spectacular, so it may have stabilized at a certain level, but it has not seen that kind of ups and downs which your relations with Russia or China's relations with Russia or Europe's relationship with Russia has seen through. And that's in itself a statement. Now, if one looks at the world today, Russia today, I think as a consequence of what is going on in Ukraine, it seems to me clear, and I assume it seems to them clear, that in many ways Russia's relationship with the West has broken down. And in that case, it's logical that Russia focuses more on the Asian side of Russia. Though historically Russia has always seen itself as a European power. So you are actually seeing a reinvention of Russia as a consequence of what is happening in Ukraine. You can see much of that will naturally focus on China, because that's the first and the largest country and economy that Russia encounters when it wheels around and looks at Asia. But then again, India will and has come into calculations as well. So I would predict actually a Russia which would consciously focus on the non-Western world, away from Europe, away from the United States, look much more at Asia, look possibly at other regions as well, but Asia is economically the most active. Yep. So I guess that's what you're going to see.
Okay. Well, now we in the United States have had the experience not only of lectures from India, but lectures from Canada. And, you know, I think...
they look at you as the global South.
Yeah. It's one of the more interesting relationships. And I think Dean Acheson once wrote an essay about Canadian criticisms of the United States, and he titled it "Stern Daughter of the Voice of God." But certainly the Canadian Prime Minister has made some serious charges recently. But I also see that from press reports that you have met while you're in Washington with National Security Advisor Sullivan, with our Secretary of State, Blinken, and that this subject has come up. Can you give us any information about how this is or isn't affecting U.S.-India relations, where this whole matter stands now from your perspective?
Okay. So let me start with Canada. Yes, the Canadian Prime Minister made some allegations, initially privately and then publicly. And our response to him, both in private and public, were that what he was alleging was not consistent with our policy, and that if his government had anything relevant and specific they would like us to look into, we were open to looking at it. Now, that's where that conversation is at this point of time. But to understand that conversation, you have to also appreciate that this has been an issue of great friction for many years with Canada, in fact going back to the 1980s. Then it became dormant, but in the last few years it has come back very much into play because of what we consider to be a very permissive Canadian attitude towards terrorists, extremists, people who openly advocate violence. And they have been given operating space in Canada because of the compulsions of Canadian politics. I don't think most Americans, for Americans, perhaps Canada looks very different. But it depends, from where the shoe pinches. For us, it has certainly been a country where organized crime from India, mixed with trafficking in people, mixed with secessionism, violence, terrorism. It's a very toxic combination of issues and people who have found operating space there. So a lot of our tensions with Canada, which well preceded what Mr. Trudeau said, actually come out of that. And today I'm actually in a situation where my diplomats are unsafe going to the embassy or to the consulates.
In Canada?
In Canada. They are publicly intimidated. And that has actually compelled me to temporarily suspend even visa operations in Canada. So, so as I said, often countries look very different depending on how you see them and what your interests are. But I have this problem in Canada, and so your question, did I speak about it with Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken? Yes, I did.
And?
No. Let's put it this way. They obviously shared, U.S. views and assessments on this whole situation, and I explained to them at some length. What I gave you was a summary of the concerns which I had. So I think hopefully we both came out of those meetings better informed.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, we are about to go to audience questions, and I see I have some here, but while I'm looking at them, do you have any advice for Americans who want to learn more about India? Where should young people or older people who are interested in this, where should they go to learn about this country that is looming larger and larger in American foreign policy and in world affairs?
Look, it's hard to give general advice, but I would say, and this really flows from our own conversation today, that in whatever profession people are, I think it would be useful to try to see how that particular profession or that particular set of interests are doing in India, because there may be experiences there, there may be thoughts there, ideas there, which people would find useful. For many years, India has been an absorber, an active searcher for best practices around the world. I think today we can also contribute to best practices. I give you some very different examples of this. You would have all seen that our very persuasive advocacy of yoga over the last decade has improved global health. So if anybody wants to get up in the morning and wants to have a better day, my suggestion is please, look at your phone and find the most conducive yoga practice. But on the other hand, if you are someone in the digital world and you see really how creatively today, digital mediums and practices are being embraced. And I give you an example. If you are going shopping in India today, you can leave your wallet behind. You can't leave your phone behind, because most likely the person you're buying something from will not accept cash, will want you to pull out your phone, look at the QR code and make a cashless payment. Now, we are clocking, last year we clocked 90 billion cashless financial payments. Just for a reference, the US was about 3 and China was 17.6. This year we probably would exceed. I saw the June figures, it was 9 billion transactions in June alone. So I'm giving you that as an example. Street vendors today will have a QR code on their cart and say, just make your payment there. So it could be digital, it could be wellness, it could be food habits, it could even be, this whole discussion today we have about pluralism, identity, culture, tradition. I think there are things to learn there, and I equally, just so that people don't think I'm back to that moralizing part, I do think Indians too, are getting very global. There, the world comes at you every waking hour through this wonderful instrument we carry with us, and the more we absorb, the better off we are.
Okay, great. Well, now I have some questions from the audience to ask. We have one from one of my fellow press reptiles who is here in the group today, has said that President Biden appeared confident enough in the intelligence about alleged Indian government involvement in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar to raise the issue with Prime Minister Modi at the G20. He asks, what have you done in response to the U.S. and other Western concerns? Maybe we've answered some of this already, but...
Sure. I think I answered that.
You've answered it. Okay, we move on. This is from someone at a think tank. We see India playing an increasingly important role in new multilateral groups like the G20, Quad, I2U2, India-Middle East Economic Corridor, etc. Is the Indian government looking to utilize this diplomatic momentum to strengthen more regional groupings such as SAARC, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, particularly the IORA?
Yep. We actually have an IORA meeting next month in Sri Lanka. I'll be going for that. I think we've even tabled an Indo-Pacific Oceans initiative at the East Asia Summit, where we look at non-security aspects of protecting the ocean space. Today for us the challenge is there are new opportunities, there are new combinations, and how do you do that without losing focus of what you have? So it's a kind of it's a bird in the bush and the bird in hand, but you want to keep both of them. Part of the challenge is also to keep the older partners convinced that your interest in what you've been doing for some time remains. The SAARC is an exception there. It's currently dormant because one of its members, who will remain unnamed, believes that they can practice terrorism at no cost. So that's an exception, but otherwise we've been pretty much active, and really even the latest latest initiative we're looking at is this Middle East corridor, which has India at one end and Europe at the other. So it has, for the moment, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but it is it's got the US as well as a kind of a guarantor partner, if you would. It really has a lot of possibilities because, given if we can find a more seamless, effective, competitive logistics between India and Europe, I think it will have enormous consequence for the global economy.
I have a follow-up question from someone else on the same sort of general role question. How do you see India's role changing in the Middle East? And I would add, I think many Americans may understand that there's a close India-Middle Eastern relationship on energy, but also Israel is a primary defense partner with India. And then we have millions of Indians who work in the Gulf countries. So the relationship...
9 million.
Yeah, the relationship is really quite close.
Right.
How do you see India's role developing in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, you, Walter, touched on the energy side. You've touched on the fact that you have 9 million expats in the Gulf. There's also the proximity, the historical connections out there. But we have to understand today that as India becomes a larger consumer, a bigger economy, our salience in the Middle East countries' calculations, especially the Gulf economies, is that much higher. For many countries, I think we are the largest trade partner of the UAE, and we would be among probably the top 3 of the Saudis. And it isn't just the volume of trade. We discovered during COVID, they discovered during COVID, that the Gulf is actually dependent on the daily food consumption for what comes out of India. So the economies have really got very, very deeply meshed. And today the Gulf itself is in transition. You know, if you talk to the leadership in Gulf, they are talking renewables, they're talking green hydrogen, and a lot of them are very enthusiastic in terms of digital progress. So we are finding new areas of intersection with them. I mean, if you look at Indian businesses, we are today far more entrenched in the Middle East than we've been for a long time.
Yep, I think that's right. We have a final question, and then we'll bring this part of the program to a close, which is, again, without mentioning any names, somebody's asked, as we speak today, the situation in India's western neighborhood is deteriorating at a fast pace. There could be a situation where a country could collapse or see unrest. How is India preparing for such an unknown event, or how could it prepare?
In an unnamed country.
In an unnamed country to the west of India.
You know, we have a few countries.
There's more than one option.
Who are having problems of their own. You know, look, today there are countries in different parts of the world in crises of different kinds, and we have a few proximate to us. We saw Sri Lanka, which really went through a very, very, almost an economic meltdown last year, and we had to step forward because they were engaged in a negotiation with the fund, and their needs were so immediate and so serious that we actually did the largest bilateral lending that we've ever done, which was we gave them almost a package of $4 billion as a way of stabilizing their economy. The unnamed country to our west, which we are talking about, they have a much, their problems are much more long term. They're much more deeper historically in terms of what happens when distortions have been introduced into the natural progress of an economy. That if you have, let us say, excessive expenditure on the military, or if your borrowing has not been prudent, or if you have infrastructure which doesn't pay its way, I think there are a lot of factors there in multiple chickens are coming home to roost at the same time.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I know we're all grateful to Minister Jaishankar for his time. I'll ask you to respect that time as we go. He has a very busy schedule today, so he and I will head out here. There is coffee and other assorted delicacies in the back, I'm afraid more American than Indian. And in 15 minutes, we'll reassemble here where there's going to be a panel discussion led by Hudson's Japan chair and a very distinguished fellow and longtime friend of India, Ken Weinstein. And so I hope to see you back for that soon. Thank you.
Thank you.